And there we go.
All right.
Right. Well, look, just kicking off the next in the series of chats and Wargamer stories, and very pleased to have on today Joe Bilton. You might also know him as Joe Wargamer if you follow him on Twitter. And I'm really pleased to be chatting to Joe today because he's also made some fantastic contributions to Firepower blog that have been really, really well received. I think the first bit that you did, Joe, has been our most well-read blog piece. So that's fantastic. There's obviously an appetite for what you got to say.
Yeah.
So, Joe, let's start off with the obligatory War Games podcast question.
Yeah.
How did you get into the hobby?
Well, I'm actually quite a newcomer to like tabletop wargaming. I've only been playing for about 2 years now, and I'm not. And I've been into history since I was like a teenager, particularly World War II, and I have played like RPGs and D&D and things for years and stuff. So I've sort of been in the sort of like miniatures hobby area for a long time. Yeah. But it was only a couple of years ago that I was Googling something. Why was I Googling something? I can't think why, but up came in the screenshot was pictures of bolt action, like a thing, and I thought, why have I never got into world, like, wargaming? Because I like painting minis and I like those sorts of games, and I also like World War II, and I used to play IL-2 flight sim, loads and loads of stuff, and like World War II computer games. But why have I never made that jump? So I thought, okay, I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna lose, So I picked up a box, like a couple of starter armies from Warlord of like a standard German, like mid-war army, and British, and that was my first thing. And I got them, and I thought, this is really cool. What a great game! It's just so fun, And then it sort of cascaded. So now I've got like nearly all. I haven't got Italy or North Africa yet, but I've got like everything else covered. US Marines and 14 different German armies, and so I've really gone in quite a lot in 2 years.
Joe, you're not going to stop until you've got at least everything.
I know. I planned like a couple of years ago, like last year. I was like, okay, I've blocked out which theatres I'm going to explore, over the next thing, and Pacific was way down the list. And I was like, well, I'm not there for a while, and then in September, when Warlord said, they're bringing out the Mariana campaign book, and I was like, maybe I will try it. And now, I've got like a lot of jungle trees, and I'm currently painting a US Marine army and stuff. So I've sort of been bitten by the bug quite strongly, and have got sort of jumped headfirst into it.
Well, fantastic. I mean, if you don't mind me asking you, Joe, how old are you?
I'm 39.
Because you're one of this supposedly rare, almost non-existent breed of people who might be described as young.
I know. I'm just on the cusp, just shy of 40 now. But yeah, maybe.
You're almost like Yeti-like status.
I know. We saw one of them. They were. Yeah.
So who are you gaming with then, Joe? I mean, have you got a group?
Well, I game with. I'm lucky that a lot of my family live nearby, so. Well, they used to come around more because they could. But my brother-in-laws, I've both got them both playing, and because I have, like all the armies, I'm not asking them to have anything. They can just come along and use my stuff. So that's good there. My own brother, he plays. My nephew, I've got him playing as well. And recently, I've got my dad playing on Zoom. Playing as well, so, and he lives up in Shropshire, so he's far away, but because I'm in Watford, so I've got enough players sort of nearby and stuff, and I've managed to have a few games over Zoom in the last year, like far fewer, because I was getting down to like having a game like every 2 weeks before, and that's dropped down to lower than that, but they're still really keen, My brother-in-law keeps saying, "Oh, when can we have a next game and stuff. And I was like, yeah,
That's fantastic, though, that you've got this sort of little Bilton clan.
Yeah, it's good.
And
It's
no,
good.
that's excellent. And I mean, that must have been very cool to have had a game with your dad as well.
It was.
I imagine that was a really good experience.
It was, because I got my dad into playing Dungeons and Dragons this year as well.
Right.
Back in like March or something. I said, look, do you want to try? Like, we can play online, right? It's really fun. Let's do that. And so he's now hooked on that. And so we're having like a weekly game of that. And I said to him, like last month, I was like, well, do you want to try this game as well? He said, how does that work? I said, well, I'll have the camera set up on the table, and and I, honestly, I will roll the dice fairly. I won't fudge any rolls for you or anything. And he loved it. He thought it was really great. And he said to me like, oh, when's the next game of bot action? It's really good. So
yeah,
so that's really nice.
I mean, it's been a recurrent theme the last couple of chats I've had with people about how the lockdown has really kind of forced people to innovate and how their hobbies kind of change consequence. Yeah. And I mean, last week, I was very fortunate enough to be invited to have a game with two chaps on Twitter, Matt Slade and Paul Edwards. And it was fantastic. I mean, we had a game of sharp practice. Matt has got absolutely beautiful terrain and miniatures and laid it all on and umpired it for us. Paul dialed in from Potteries, and I'm up in Cheshire, and I think Matt was down in Gloucestershire. And, and we had a fantastic time. People I'd not met before, had a really, really good game. And it's interesting how the hobby has changed as a consequence of the lockdown. And hopefully it will remain a real positive way of engaging with people in the future.
Yeah, I'm sure people will still be playing, even when people are able to meet face-to-face properly, people will still be playing on Zoom, because actually, you can play a game with anyone around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't replace those face-to-face games, but it just supplements them.
Yeah.
And gives you another option. And I think it's great. It really has kind of changed how I view my hobby and my approach to it. It's almost sort of become much more international now, really.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'm just going to move on to the questions because I'm conscious of time. So that's your wargaming history in a nutshell, then, Joe. So tell us a little bit about the day job, because there's an awful lot of overlap there as well, isn't there?
Yeah. So my day job is I make RPG battle maps full time, like for D&D and Pathfinder and those sorts of things. I used to be a science teacher, and I was like head of science, and I was a science teacher for like 12, 13 years, I think. And what was a sort of side hobby thing of making these battle maps eventually sort of grew. And about 2.5 years ago, I went full time. And so now I work at home, and I draw dungeons and castles and orc fortresses and stuff as my job, which is pretty cool.
That's fantastic. And I mean, is that, well, I mean, there are lots of advantages for working for yourself and working from home, that freedom, that independence. But again, it's interesting how many people I'm coming across who are engaged with the hobby in a professional way as well.
Yeah.
And it's really quite interesting that, again, this view that is somehow a little bit of a cottage industry, and yet there are so many people in one way or another who are actually making a living out of it and are doing well out of it as well.
Yeah, we had when we started it, we had no plans for it to be this grand business that would sort of just like a little side thing, and I feel amazingly lucky that that I was able to, because I love teaching. I really enjoyed teaching, but to work for yourself at home, like no pressure from bosses and stuff, and be able just to be creative. I never sort of thought that I would end up being in the arts creative sort of business, because a science degree and whatever and stuff. So I was like, well, science and education and whatever and stuff. So it's quite I love it. It's really good. It's a really fun day job to have.
Oh, have you always had a bit of an artistic bent then, Joe?
I think so. I mean, I used to.
Kid, you were good at
it. Do you know the flight sim Il Tu Sturmovik? right? So I got into that years and years and years ago, like, I don't know, 20 years ago or something, whenever it came out. And I really got hooked on the making skins for the aircraft, because I liked World War II aircraft, and I liked profile art, and I liked the flight sim. So I was like, well, it works together. So I became quite prolific. I used to release, I was there as someone called Canon UK, and I used to release hundreds of skins of aircraft and stuff. So I did a lot of Photoshop work with that. Yeah. So I had Photoshop, and I used it for making the skins, and it did give me quite a good artistic grounding, so that when I started making D&D maps, you know, like a decade later, I actually had a lot of experience using Photoshop. That meant that I wasn't learning it from scratch, because it's quite a steep learning curve. But I've always enjoyed arty things. Just I never sort of pictured it would be my job.
No, that's a kind of an amazing set of circumstances.
Yeah,
those things would align and lead you to where you are. It's fantastic. You know, I mean, I suppose one of the reasons that we came to talk, and one of the things I think you're most well known for, certainly on Twitter, is the terrain making side of things. Yeah, and that's clearly, you know, a part of the hobby that you must enjoy, and you certainly have an aptitude for it, without any doubt. So how did that side of the hobby start to develop, Joe?
I think it was because I quite like when I started playing the war games and stuff, I quite like the fact that you could sort of get down on eye level, on ground level, and it was a very cinematic game, you know. So you have these scenes, these little like little pause dioramas between turns, and you look down and go, look, you can see down that road, you can see that tank coming around the corner, oh look, and the blokes are hiding there and stuff. So that visual was really good. So I thought, well, I want the visuals of the game to be as nice as possible. So I want the terrain to be good. And I'd seen people, like Pat Smith from Silver Whistle Wargaming, his blog, and I had seen Mel's terrain tutor stuff. And I thought, this is very possible. You can do some really good tables, you know. And there were some amazing pictures of people's wargame tables and things. I thought, well, I want my games to look like that. I want them to be really immersive. I want them to be really visually rich. And so I started by picking up a couple of kits from Sarissa. And my first attempts weren't amazing, because I hadn't worked in that medium before. So I had, you know, just sort of painted them and dry brushed them and whatever stuff. And they were fine, you know, they were right and stuff. And then I thought, well, how could I improve this? And so just by in little incremental steps, I tried new techniques and stuff. And then I went back over some old ones. So recently I got some of my old buildings down that I rarely used, because they sort of stood out as, you know, not very good next to the other ones.
I've seen the pictures of the factory ruins that you were renovating.
Yeah, and just, you know, a coating of filler over it, you know, and then texture that and stuff, so you can, you know, like upcycle old kits and stuff. And then I just, you know, I really enjoyed making the kits, and so making the terrain and stuff. So a lot of my time actually that I spend in hobby stuff goes to building terrain stuff. I tend to, with like painting minis and tanks, I tend to have them on the go. So in the kitchen, I've got like I've annexed one of the worktops in the kitchen.
I bet you're popular.
No, I know. I've managed, it's like, you know, it's almost like I occupied it so long it became accepted that it was occupied now, and they gave up the claim to that area. And so I fully colonized it. There's shelves and everything there. But that's my like miniatures work area. So I tend to have, you know, a handful of vehicles and soldiers and stuff at various stages. When I'm in the kitchen making a cup of tea or whatever and stuff, I'll put, you know, 5 minutes on those sort of things. But then when I have like a sit down for an hour, do something, that I tend to do it on terrain, because that sort of, a lot of that doesn't really work with little bits here and there. You want to sort of go, right, this is going to take an hour to texture this building and, you know, do the filler and stuff. You can't really leave the filler half going sort of thing. Whereas you could easily paint 10 people's boots.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, and let them,
yeah.
So yeah, a lot of time that goes into that. But I think it's worth it. And, you know, I've got my loft is groaning with number of kits.
The way it's MDF.
There's so much. There's so much stuff. I've managed to annex the loft as well, and there's a lot of stuff up there, a lot of kits, and it's, you know, difficult bringing it down when it's time for a game. It's like 15 trips up the ladder to bring down kits and stuff. But I think, you know, when it's all on the table, it looks really good.
Yeah. So where do you play then, Joe? Does it tend to be the kitchen table as well?
No, I play in the living room.
Your poor wife.
Yeah, I know. It's not a massive house. It's like a like a Victorian terrace. So it's not a giant house. And so we got a table, like a 4 foot by 3 foot table. But I've got some big MDF boards that I leave on top and sort of, like, you know, strap together and things to make it a bigger table. And I have to go up to the loft, bring down all the stuff downstairs, set it up, and then back up again the next morning, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting what you were talking about, kind of, you know, that cinematic aspect of the game. And I wonder whether, you know, bolt action, I've never played it, but it's often been described as kind of like a Hollywood version of World War II. And I just wondered if that, you know, whether how much of an influence the rule set had on.
I don't know, because I think, I mean, I haven't tried Chain of Command yet, mainly because I wanted to sort of definitely understand one rule set really happily and, you know, really confidently, sort of thing. But I've seen lots of Chain of Command games as well that look as good. You know, people are as into the visuals as with bolt action. I mean, I don't play bolt action in. I probably play it in kind of a Chain of Command hybrid sort of way, in that I don't use lists or point type things. I go for historical setups and things. So, you know, if I'm doing a game against, you know, a Panzer Grenadier division, I will try and make sure that balance the things. And if I'm doing a particular year or a particular campaign, if one side ends up with hardly any troops, or I've only got Panzer III and you've got, you know, Pershing or something, then fair enough, you know, that's like whatever the sort of thing is. So so I think I try and get like historical accuracy to it as much as I can. I do like bolt action rules. I think that they are actually a very straightforward, fun way of playing the game, getting straight into the sort of mechanism, and for teaching it to like my opponents, brothers-in-law and stuff, who haven't really had any experience with war games at all. It's been a really easy, you know, 10 minutes in, they've understood the rules and they can play, and they're making tactical decisions.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Yeah. You know, I think any rule set that makes it easy for people to pick up some figures and have a game, I think it's fantastic. I mean, it's, you know, I'm not, you know, I mean, I do play a lot of Lardy rules, and I sort of, my history, I was an ex sort of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, Warhammer as a teen, and then had the break and came back to the hobby, and I kind of settled on Flames of War when I returned, because I kind of understood a lot of the concepts. You know, it was it reminded me a lot of the principles within things like, you know, Warhammer 40k. So it was a very easy transition. And I can remember the first time I read Chain of Command, it really was almost, you know, the scales fell from my eyes, kind of thing. It was amazing to me that there was so much innovation in the rule set, and it really did kind of blow my mind, really, in many respects. You know, but again, I suppose that just shows you how much the hobby has evolved and changed.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched a lot of the I watched the, what was it called? It was the sort of France 1940 Blitzkrieg campaign. And they did that series of videos. They played through the Jean Blue Gap thing. They played through that like over 6 videos, and I watched all of them. and they're really good. And I actually am keen. I have sort of thought maybe I should try it this year, try China Con this year, because I picked up the what's it called? It's one of the short campaign things, bite-sized campaign. The 12th SS Operation.
Martlet?
Yes, Martlet. Yeah, that's the one. So I picked that up, and I read through it, and I thought it was brilliant. So I thought I'm gonna try this, and I also picked up what's the campaign booklet called? At the Sharp End. Yeah, I got that as well, right? And so I quite like the sort of tracking of officers and that stuff. So there's lots of elements that I want to sort of incorporate into my games and things, and so I think it's probably something I will try this year.
Sounds like it's only a matter of time.
I know. It's like I'll probably after this interview, I'll probably log on to onto the site and order this.
Yeah, no, I do like I must admit, I do think the large TV videos on YouTube are excellent. And obviously the abiding memory of the Gemblo Gap series is when Big Rich throws his dice across the table. Which I think is rather excellent. That, and we call that doing a Clarky now. If anybody knows what we're playing. Well, look, so you mentioned you're thinking about the Pacific as well, Joe. So, given that you've got this kind of cartography type background as well, how do you go about planning out a new project? Certainly something as a major departure as the Pacific, where I should imagine practically everything you're having to start from scratch again.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I sort of tend to make lists of things. So I like to be a bit of a completionist with stuff, and so I'll go, okay, so I'm doing a new theatre. What do I need? So I sort of with the soldiers and stuff, I'll look at I buy mainly from Warlord or some artisans, some Empress stuff and things. But so I'll look and see what the sort of core sets are. And I go, right, okay, so I want these minis. I need both forces because I need to have two sides. So I've got a Japanese and a US Marine Corps sort of force. I go, right, well, I want to have all the support options. So I'll go through all the options, add those. And I want to have a good selection of armor. I want to basically be that when I'm playing the game, me or my opponent can go, oh, we'd like to play it this way by having armored support, or we want to make sure we've got enough artillery or whatever. And so I want to have everything sort of ready to go. And then with terrain aspects, I sort of block it into a new terrain map, sort of like a textured cork mat thing. What vegetation do I need? So jungle stuff, and a handful of buildings and things. That's the sort of core start of it. And then I'll go on to eBay, and I'll order, like, so the marine stuff. I bought about 6 billion aquarium plants and cheap jungly trees and bamboo from China. That just arrived constantly in the post for weeks. Every day, the postman was there with bags of parcels and stuff, going, "What is all this stuff?" It's like, it's tiny trees, and then I'll just sort of block it into like a checklist of, right, I need this many pieces of these buildings and so on, and then try and work my way through thoughtfully. I mean, I've had a bit of a hiccup to my sort of like schedule recently, in that Christmas happened, and so to do like all the jungly terrain stuff, I need a lot of space to. It's messy, like it's loads of MDF bits, and then it's got all these drilling trees into it and stuff, and then lots of filler and lots of paint and lots of flock, and so that needs lots of space drying, like big boards drying outside and stuff, or around the house. But it's not really feasible to have loads of boards of drying trees, so I put that on pause until later on, and that's why I'm working on currently lots of little Normandy houses, because they occupy a little space when I'm working on them. They're not 6 hectares of forest. So I try and work through, and I try and, as much as it's possible, try and complete a thing before I sort of move on to a new thing. Although my Normandy stuff is almost constant. That's my favourite theatre. And so, like, I'm constantly dripping more Normandy buildings into my collection. Right?
Yeah. Is when you are you mentioned sort of constraints around size and obviously the practicalities of actually building this stuff. So when you're designing it, you know, modularity and flexibility around how you kind of build these pieces, is that very much at the forefront of your thought?
I mean, I have made some pieces that are far too big, and I think, oh, that's too big now. It's hard to store, you know. I try with the foresty bits and the tree bases to think about how big the bases are and whether they'll height-wise fit into boxes and stuff. I mean, those like cheap Chinese trees though are pretty forgiving in terms of storage. You know, you can just chuck them in a box, and they're light enough not to press on each other too much. They're also, you know, really durable plastics. So I don't mind those being chucked in too much and things. The buildings I can't really tell. I tend not to build. I tend not to put bases on buildings because it makes it much harder to store the buildings if they've got a garden attached to them. But I have made separate gardens so that so they're, you know, a piece with walls or hedges on three sides, and the size of them basically equates to the width of a standard building. But at worst, you know, if it's a bit too big, you have it stick past the house and you put a hedge over the gap, or if it's too small, you just accept they've built their wall in the middle of their window. It's you know, it's not a big deal. But that lets me have gardens and yards and those sorts of things, but it doesn't mean that I'm stuck with a kit attached to a big garden, which has to go on a shelf or something because there's no space to. You know, so most of my stuff is stored in you know, like useful boxes, the big ones and stuff, and I stack the buildings in, and I turn their roofs upside down so they go flat, and that wouldn't be possible so much if they had a big garden thing.
No. So I mean, so obviously, you know, you've ended up with something that, by the sounds of it, then is very flexible. But one of the things I also wanted to ask you about was, you know, historical accuracy. When you're modelling these things, you know, to what extent do you do research, look at original pictures and this kind of thing?
Yeah, I do a lot actually. I sometimes will base a particular building on a particular building. So one good example was, as I got from Charlie Foxtrot Models, I got a couple of years ago, or a year ago, the cafe restaurant Desire Ungouf Soleil. My French is terrible.
No, that's easy for you to say.
The one in Carentan, anyway, right? The one that the famous building in Carentan with the airborne in front of it, and it's a fantastic kit from Colin, and I really wanted to make it as accurate as possible. And so that one, I spent ages finding every possible view of the building. The building's gone now, but you know, there was enough pictures, so many long shot ones down there and whatever and stuff. And so I managed to get that really accurate and put a lot of things to that. And then for generic buildings, I do spend a lot of time looking at pictures of you know, type in Normandy 1944 pictures, you know, onto Google, or going around Street View and looking at buildings that are old buildings. And also we went to France in September for a month. We drove around all of France. It was really good. And I took loads of pictures of buildings in the little French villages and towns.
Yeah,
it's, you know, like it's just a classic look to how those things look and stuff. That they've been good inspiration as well. You know, like seeing how they've, you know, when you have the sort of ghost ads on the side of the walls, or you know, the color palettes and the materials used and things. I do look at those things to guide me into getting the authentic feel for the building, so that when you see the street, you think, okay, this is supposed to be Germany, this is supposed to be France, this is, you know.
And again, I suppose that, you know, historical plausibility and immersion, I suppose, are two sides of the same coin, really. I suppose they're both fundamentally linked. So, yeah, how do you feel about things like tokens on the tabletop when you're playing them, Joe? I mean, you know, You've got these lovely
No,
models.
I know. I mean, I take them off for photographs. So when I'm taking photographs, I take the tokens away because they obviously soldiers stand next. I use for my pin markers. I use these bright yellow like tiddlywinks, which obviously spoil the immersion somewhat. But at the same time, though, I'm all right with them being quite visible on the table because it is a game, and in order for you to play the game properly and make decisions based on what's happening, you need to have clear visual information from the game. And so I'm all right with them being quite visible, because if I want to look across and see which units are pinned and who I should be careful with, I want to quickly see, oh look, that whole area is covered in yellow tokens, and so on. I mean, because really, when you think about you're playing a war game, you are detached from it in a way that the real soldiers and the real commanders wouldn't be, and so they would have had other visual cues as to how their troops are doing, because they look at their troops and see them all doing themselves or covered in blood or whatever. So you would know, and we don't have that. Our minis don't get destroyed physically. That would be terrible. And so, so to balance that off, you have your sort of like visual tokens. I'm all right with them being, but like I said, I do remove them for photographs. I don't want to. Those things.
So, sort of off on a bit of a tangent then, do you ever build a terrain piece that doesn't lend itself to a good game? Can you kind of can you construct an incredibly tight and perfectly put together set of Normandy back alleys, and then when you actually start to play it, your minis won't fit in it, and you can't get your
I did that once. I did that on one thing. I did what was it? It was like I made an orchard, and it's a very nice orchard. It's got a little wall around it and everything, but it's really difficult to put anyone in the orchard. So you sort of have to flick the blokes into it, and they're all sort of like lying down, and then never touch them again for the game. They're going to hold that position. They're not going to move.
Come out again.
No, they're going to stay there, guys. Fight to the last bullet. You're in that orchard now, and when the game's over, you tip them out onto the couch. So some bits, but I think I sort of learned from that, and I try and avoid that. So when I do like ruins and things, obviously I'd like to have the realism of huge piles of rubble, brick dust, or whatever stuff. But then at the same time, if you can't put your minis in there, if you can't put at least 10 soldiers in there, basically vertical, then you sort of aren't really getting the benefit from it. It's not a diorama entirely. So, like a rough ground and stuff and some piles in the corner is enough to show that. And I have got a big bucket of like gravelly rubble bits and stuff that I can sprinkle on if I want as temporary stuff. But I've sort of tried to keep the models open enough that they are usable.
I mean, maybe that's sort of almost the third element. Then you've talked about historical plausibility and immersion, and maybe playability. Then is another factor.
Yeah, I mean that's also a thing that comes into like our designing of battle maps for like D&D and things. Is that there's the visual element and stuff, and you want to make it an exciting location to play D&D on. Equally, you want to make it a playable space. And so when we're designing, maps and things, we're thinking, well, could people maneuver their minis around it in this space? Is it clear where the walls are? Is it clear where you can walk and where you can't walk? Is this bit too narrow? Does this wall, if this wall crosses 2 squares, then how will players know, are they in the room or not in the room? Are they on this or not on this? And so we have an element of like game design and game constraints coming into our designs. And that's the same, I guess, for when I'm sort of making terrain things for war games. They are going to be used as war game pieces,
Yeah.
So I did once. I built a house as well. I furnished inside because I thought it'd be nice, you know. So I got some like doll furniture, little beds and stuff. And the first one I did, I glued them into place. I thought, oh yeah, this is where their bed is and stuff. But that was annoying because then when I came to put soldiers in the room and they got their, you know, their bases on them and stuff, it's like, well, I can't actually fit anyone in this room because there's a bed there and stuff. So I either had the furniture loose if I'm going to have so if I got a ruined building and the roof is gone or open or whatever, I might have some loose furniture in there. But generally I have no furniture because, you know, the buildings are rarely open. And when they are open, you got to put someone inside it. The important thing is that you got the soldiers inside the building, and so the floors are left open, even though it would look better as a fully furnished house.
So you, it sounds as if you game pretty much exclusively in 28mm, Joe.
Yep.
I mean, have you ever been tempted by any of the other scales?
Yes and no. Like I can see the appeal of, you know, using the smaller scales and having then the bigger battles and things. But because my goal is to have like a very thorough and complete World War II sort of gaming thing, and I got constraints in terms of how much space I have in my house to fit stuff. I would rather have one scale and do that completely than have to sacrifice you know, one area to go, okay, well, I'll also have to have, because, you know, my sort of nature of wanting to have things complete, if I went down like okay, I'm going to do 15mm or something, then I'd want to have all the buildings again in 15mm, you know, and a whole forest in 15mm and stuff. And that, there's no space for that as well. So I made the choice to go, even though, and it's the same with other sort of time periods and things. You know, like I see people playing like War of the Roses games and stuff, and it looks really good, and Romans, and I thought, oh, that's really, and there's that the cowboy game people are playing now, you know, they look really good, right? And I think, they look really good, and but I think that I haven't got the space to have a full set of Wild West buildings and a full set of Roman ruins, and so I managed to keep with one time period and one scale.
Well, I think that's very, very admirable.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just a terrible butterfly. I find it impossible to maintain any form of focus. I just have whole orphan armies sat around at home because I haven't got around to painting the opposition or you know, I'm terrible. I must admit that World War II is the period of time for which we always return. You know, it's a fascinating era and such an engaging conflict with so many different aspects to it. But quite recently I've started painting 15mm Napoleonics because my mate who I game with regularly, Nigel, wants to do some sharp practice on the peninsula. And so I had Napoleonics in 2mm, 6mm, 10mm, and 15mm now. Why? It's terrible. Yeah, I just can't help myself.
Right, you should do some crazy mixed scale stuff where you just put them all on the table together. This regiment over here, they're in 2mm, but these guys, they're bigger than them. They were better fed, and
yeah, we might end up in one of those bizarre Father Ted moments, small and far away.
Yeah, exactly. You just go, those troops down there, they're far away, and cover your table and things, and like, wow, it's so realistic. Look, it's like I'm really near these guys.
So, look, have you got an interest in 3D printing then, Joe? When you're thinking about your terrain, is there something come up in you?
I haven't got a 3D printer, and I sort of thought about it, and I'm not sure. I mean, there's some really cool stuff being printed, and Paul Edwards from Sabotage did a really good the cavalry for Operation Martlet. He printed that and I painted it up and stuff, and that was fantastic. And that was something I couldn't really have built from scratch or anything, or from MDF, because it was far too intricate, and that was really good for that stuff. I can see, for me, I can see that if I had the 3D print, I'd be quite keen on printing little add-on bits for things. So things like dormers to go on buildings and stuff, or you know, signs for things, and like street furniture and little bits sort of thing to add on. But I think if I did 3D buildings, or if I had a 3D building that was printed, I would still add stuff to it with you know, with card and filler and stuff. So I think for me, if I was to use 3D printing, it would be to add to what I currently do, because I thoroughly like using MDF kits. I think there's a lot of flexibility in what they are. For example, like I picked up from Sarissa the large farmhouse, and it's like it's got a little arched doorway and stuff, and I turned that into a barn by blocking up most of the windows and making new windows, and I removed the interior floor and like a hayloft and stuff and whatever stuff. And that was, you know, sort of seeing the building, seeing the sort of the shell of the building, and thinking, what can I do with that, and using that as a basis for it, and, you know, build my own thing. And if I was to get a 3D, so I really like the sort of like the texture that the filler gives to a thing, more than you get from resin or, you know, filament printing sort of thing. It feels like a more realistic surface. It paints like a more realistic surface for painting stonework and plasterwork and things. And so what I've done, even when I did that Calvary that Paul had printed off, I actually coated it in a thin slurry of polyfiller, just to give that grip and that texture to it. And when I've done, I also painted up a set of walls that Paul had printed as well, and I used filler on that as well. So on the brickwork, I coated that, and I actually filled them in as mortar. And so if I was doing even a 3D building, I think I would end up, you know, adding bits in filler and cardboard and stuff to give that texture and difference.
And in 28mm scale as well. I mean, MDF is going to be, from a cost perspective, 3D buildings in 28mm scale are going to be really quite expensive.
Yeah, I'm sure though in a few years' time they'll come down in, you know, in the price and stuff. But yeah, I mean, you know, when you can pick up a bunch of MDF kits for, you know, sort of £10 a go, and filler is super cheap, and, you know, I use household emulsion tester pots for most of the paints, like £1 each from Wilco. It does mean that, you know, I get those buildings, and they look like resin buildings. They're like, you know, the sort of, you know, like fully cast resin buildings and things. They look like that, but they only cost me, you know, the kit price, like, you know, plus a couple of quid for materials.
Yeah. So look, I wanted to go back then, Joe, just to some of the things you mentioned earlier about the day job and about the role playing and things like that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, you know, when I used to play Dungeons and Dragons way back in the day, Red Box, 2nd edition, it was all kind of theatre of the mind type stuff. But there has been this growth of like tabletop role-playing games. And when you consider, you know, warband style games, particularly things like Frostgrave, and war games that have an element of character progression, if you will, development. You know, you mentioned Dawn's, you mentioned at the sharp end, and there's departures as well. And in Rebels and Patriots and in the Dan Mersey rules systems, you know, there is often the concept of developing traits and gaining glory and progressing. Yeah, so do you think there are additional areas of cross-pollination between role-playing?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I was thinking that you could almost do a reverse of how like a standard war game campaign works with this. So you know, in a standard war game campaign, you play your large-scale tactical movements, and you move your token for a whole army to this town and whatever and stuff, and then you zoom in for a game on the tabletop to decide a particular encounter that the big strategic game has decided. You could do the reverse of that. You could there's a few like RPG games that are from the viewpoint of being a soldier. So Savage World has got like a weird war sort of thing. You could play that without the weird bit and just make it World War II. Those sort of things. So you could play a game where you role play being the characters and you are like in their mindset and you're being them, and then when an event happens that involves you in a larger combat, you could then play that. You could scale up to then playing that on the tabletop with minis, knowing that your characters that are on the table have actually got this backstory that you've been playing in a separate part of the game.
Yeah.
And that's like an upgrade, even just to sort of knowing the names of the officers and tracking their progress. Is actually, you've been that character, you played their story until they got to this point, the interactions and their relationship with each other and those sorts of things. And you're playing the game, and how you view that person then in that game, you'd be even more invested. Not just because, or if they die, the benefits they've got have lost, or you're quite fond, but actually that's your character. That's your character from, and you've role played them for hours, and, they've had these adventures and these backstories.
Yeah.
And then once that's happened, you go back into your role play mode, and you can progress now, knowing that, one of your friends got killed, or you're under siege now, whatever.
Yeah.
It's almost like a reverse of the campaign mode.
Yeah, I mean, we used to play a game called Roll Master. They used to be called Chart Master, somewhat derisorily, but at its heart, what you could achieve was really, really complex results in combat through maybe only one or two dice rolls. And in many respects, that's one of the things that I like about Frostgrave. And I don't know if you had the opportunity to play it.
Yeah, I did a few of it.
Yeah, but the thing that I really, really like about that system is the fact that combat is resolved in so few dice rolls. I think that, it's a really, really interesting way of approaching really, really kind of complex processes and breaking them down into their absolute kind of fundamentals.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of that kind of thinking, I think, could be applied within wargaming. I don't like systems where I'm having to roll multiple dice, loads and loads of dice multiple times to achieve effectively nothing at the end of the process. And I think that sort of streamlining approach is one that I think is going to, he's already a significant factor in wargaming. No, but it's interesting. I mean, one of the other things that is a big feature of role playing is kind of world building.
Yeah,
something that you do very much through your map making. So, what do you think about this concept of imaginations? Because I know this is something that people like Henry Hyde on battle games are incredibly keen.
Yeah.
Is that something you've ever thought about? Or
I mean, not so much, because I think because I only play World War II, and there's already such there's such variety already in World War II in terms of campaigns and operations and theatres and troops and those sorts of things, that I haven't really felt the need to explore imaginary sort of, obviously, to be fair, like when you're doing like a commando raid sort of mission, you might make up the mission, right? And so that is imagining a situation and a storyline and things. But for me, I think there's been enough. There's enough variety still, untouched even. In World War II things, I haven't felt the need to think. But there's some really cool stuff. I see people, putting a lot of time into their world building for those things and stuff. And world building is really fun. I do, in our D&D campaigns, it's actually really good fun making up these kingdoms, working out, alliances and intrigue between them and how that will play into your story things. So I think if I was playing like fantasy war games, I think I would very much get into world building of those sorts of things. But I haven't felt the need though with World War II yet.
And I suppose, in one of many respects, I suppose that really leads into my sort of next question. I mean, which was around, you know, do you find it difficult to separate the day job from the hobby? But it sounds very much as if you have a very clear delineation in your own mind. You know, even though they're both
because my day job is making these maps and things. So I essentially, like, you know, I've always been quite good with, even when I used to work as a teacher, of drawing a line between working hours and not working hours. And so, you know, it's like, well, this is time, I finished now, that's it, I've stopped.
Yeah.
And so with map making, when it became a job, and I had to go, okay, well, these are the hours I'm doing this work sort of thing. I really enjoy doing it as well. And so, you know, I make the things, I make the maps and stuff. I know when I want to stop, because I was like, well, I've done enough for today, I'm going to stop now. And then I've got the wargaming hobby aspect sort of thing, which doesn't overlap too strongly with the map making things. I also do, I mean, sometimes you know, if I'm playing a D&D game, I've got the benefit of going, well, if I need a certain map I haven't made yet, I can make that map.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm making the maps which we still go and sell, but I'm making them because I think I want this map for my own games. And sometimes it's like, well, I'm making this map because this is a good map for customers and it'll be a useful thing. So we don't really play many sci-fi RPG games.
No.
But we do have big sci-fi collection, and so those are maps that I'm making. I'm not currently using myself, you know, but so that is a more work-based thing, because I'm thinking, well, this is for our sales and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think I've got quite a nice balance of hobby versus, yeah.
So in regards to the map making then, Joe, I mean, do you tend to work for companies, or do you work on like a commission basis for
No, we work on our own. Me and my wife, she designs some of the maps and I do all the Photoshop work. No, we're basically independent. And so we have a Patreon, and also we sell on Drive-Through RPG.
Okay.
So we make the maps ourselves and sell them. We do some work for companies, and we do some Kickstarter work for people and stuff, but the bulk of our stuff is just make our own maps and put them on for sale.
So if somebody's interested in getting in contact with you then, Joe, to find out about that side of things, how would they best be?
Well, we have a Twitter, which is at Heroic Maps, and we're on Drive-Through as Heroic Maps, and we're on Patreon as Heroic Maps. And we're consistent, see? And we've got a Facebook, which is also Heroic Maps. And our email is heroicmaps@gmail.com. So basically, Heroic Maps is us.
Heroic Maps is the thing. Well, look, thank you very much for your time today, Joe. I really do appreciate it. And like I said at the start, I really appreciate the contribution you made to the blog as well.
Yeah,
it's been fantastic, really well received. And yeah, I wish you all the best with Heroic Maps and the terrain building and everything else. And wish you a Merry Christmas as well.
Yeah, you too, Andrew.
Cheers, Joe.
Cheers.
It very much has been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.